Hello and thanks for watching my weekly video. This week we're going to do things a little bit different. Instead of my updates on what's going on in the county, I have a special guest joining us today for a discussion. Today it's my pleasure to talk to my predecessor, former county executive Ike Leggett. And I asked him to join me today in honor of Black History Month. Ike was county executive from 2006 to 2018. He was the first black county executive, also first black county council member. And so you've had long years of service in Montgomery County. And I thought it would be good to talk to you about how you view your election from an historical perspective and, and things related to that. So I'm going to turn to you, and it's always good to see you and good to talk to you. And thanks so much for coming on today. I'm really glad that you're here, and I look forward to this discussion. So let's get to it. So my first question was, now that you're not county executive anymore, what are you doing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I look back at the job today and I say to myself, when you look at the challenges you guys had to deal with COVID, plus all the other difficult issues that you have to deal with, that was a difficult time period, and did a wonderful job in getting those things through. So it's a little bit different than the time that I served, but the COVID was a game changer, I think, for virtually everybody in elective office. Well, today, I'm involved in a large number of things that really go to my passion. I never looked at the county executive job as a job per se. I looked at it probably more closely to community service. But my real passion has always been education. And so I'm doing an awful lot of things in the educational field. I serve on the board of Regents, for example, the University of Maryland System. I've been recently named to the BSO board in Baltimore. I serve as a member of the Board of Advisors of the University of Shady Grove. But more importantly, the board that I'm spending a great deal of time in, I've served as the chair of the implementation board for the Blueprint for Maryland, which is a real change in educational policy and operation throughout the state. So a number of boards and a few others around the county that I serve on. So it's been a lot of board work, but primarily around the areas of education.
So you were born in Texas and grew up in Alexandria, Louisiana.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about your early life growing up in the South and what ultimately brought you to Washington, D.C.?
Well, I actually was born in Texas, but it's sort of a thing just across the state. But I never lived, per se, in Texas. We lived in Louisiana. And I grew up one of 13 kids in what I call abject poverty. Lived in a 3-room house, no indoor plumbing, no lighting, none of the niceties that you see today. It was a difficult childhood. I always had as a passion, and the people that I saw that really stood out as recalled in the community were people, African Americans, who were part of the military. People whom everybody looked to in terms of the community as a whole. And so my early life passion had been, well, I want to be a military person. I liked the uniforms that they wear and so forth. And I liked how all the people relate to the military people. But growing up, one of 13 kids was very difficult in the height of Jim Crow segregation. By the time I finished high school, I was an athlete. I played quarterback football, but I'd broken my leg. I didn't have an opportunity to get scholarships to go to school. And my objective at that time was to simply join the military, first place to get out. But my parents, my mother especially, my high school football coach, urged me to try to go to college. I had no money, no scholarships, no ability to do so. But there was a work-study program at Southern University, which was about 100 miles or so from where I lived, whereby you could participate during the summer months between high school and college, earn at least some money toward college, live on the dormitories on the campus, and hopefully get a chance to get in. Well, I got on a bus and I traveled for the longest distance I'd ever traveled in my life, which is about 100 miles. Walked up to the business office and asked them to allow me to participate in the program. And they asked me for my letters of recommendations and all the things that had been certified to allow me to participate. I didn't have anything. And they told me no. Well, to make a long story short, they told me no 4 times that day, that I could not participate in the program. But eventually, at the end of the day, they decided to give me an opportunity participate in something similar to the program. I could live in the dormitory, but the only job that I could get would be working with the outside maintenance crew, which meant picking up trash and mowing the lawns around the university campus. That's what I did. Mowing the lawn, picking up trash around the university campus. And somehow, working in that sun and looking at all the other kids in the dormitories and looking at those in the libraries, working in the offices, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I made a commitment to really pursue education in a way that I found myself being remarkably successful at, because I had been simply an average student throughout most of the high school years. But I actually learned much more than I realized. I just simply had not applied myself. And so with that application and motivation, I really turned into a very, very strong, outstanding student academically. So by the time I left the school, I'd been president of all of my classes. I was president of the student body, got involved in the civil rights struggle, met people like Dr. King, Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Bell, John Lewis. I was part of all of those things, a very radicalized student on one hand, but I was also still interested in the military. And I pursued ROTC, and I pursued it with such a passion that by the time I finished school at the end of the college, I was a distinguished military graduate, and I became a graduate. And so if you look at it, most ROTC students are reserve officers. I excelled so well that I became a regular distinguished military officer as though I graduated from West Point. And so as a result of that, I actually went into the military. But before that, Mark, I had this unusual set of circumstances and conditions. Imagine this. I'm in military uniform on campus, leading marches across the campus as it relates to the military forms, preparing to go to Vietnam. I'm also the student government president, and I'm demonstrating against the war in Vietnam. So I had two distinct roles at one point, playing a military officer and student government president. And I did both of them simultaneously. But I was so committed to the military, so committed to what I had my passion to, that I went to Vietnam and became an Army captain in Vietnam. And so all of the other things that followed from that. In Vietnam, I decided to get out of the military, decided I wanted to go to law school. And I excelled at law school beyond my wildest imagination. And all the other things that you've seen about my life sort of unfolded from that point on. Became actively engaged in the county in many commissions and boards. Was a White House fellow. I was an officer in a number of agencies around in the federal government. I served as a legislative aide. I was assistant dean, associate dean of Howard University Law School and professor there. So, but it was the military. It was my involvement in civil rights, in my strong passion for public and community service. But it was a difficult, challenging struggle coming from Louisiana, abject poverty, to ultimately be in the county executive and engaged in a number of things around the county. Now I want you to imagine this transition. A person who barely did get out of high school, who fought and struggled in the height of Jim Crow. I'm now over an agency in the state government that is looking at the transformation of all public education throughout the state of Maryland. In many ways, I say to people, this kind of a story can only happen in America. It can only happen in a place like this. And we look at Black history as we're doing today, it is a reflection of that history and the commitment of so many people that preceded me that have given me the inspiration, the motivation, and the opportunity to be in the position that I'm in today.
I share with you the protests over the war during Vietnam.
Yeah.
So coming here, what did you find different, I mean, viscerally, in the climate in Montgomery County at that time, which I guess is the mid-60s, versus, Louisiana? I can guess, but you can probably say it better than I can guess it.
There are differences. The people are much more open. There's an openness and welcome to what you have here, but let's not make it a mistake. There are differences and challenges even in areas that are outside of the South. You have a greater opportunity, I think, in other parts of the United States. But those opportunities still come with some strings, some challenges and difficulties. And I've had to suffer through all of those in my role in public service, in my role in some of the elective offices that I've had, just in everyday life. Even in the Northeast, in the in western parts of the country that I've traveled in, I've always found some level of difficulties. So we make the mistake to assume that because of the challenges of a greater magnitude in the South, that other places are as open and acceptable as you would want them to be. There are challenges and difficulties throughout the entire country. But I found exceptionally here in Montgomery County was an openness and a welcome spirit which people really gave me an opportunity, and I was able to allow my abilities to move forward in a way that people welcomed. And I think that was a big difference. It was a welcoming attitude and gave me far more opportunities than I would have had other places.
So who are the early leaders of the black community who may have mentored you or helped you along the way as you started getting involved in community and thinking about politics?
The one that comes to mind, first of all, is Roscoe Nix.
Yeah.
Roscoe Nix was an outstanding community leader. He paved the way for an awful lot of people to excel. And he was fearless in his attitude about change. I learned an awful lot from him. I would not be in the position that I'm in today without people like Roscoe Nix, Hanley Norman, Ruby Rubin, Odessa Shannon, Gladys Young, and so many others who paved the way for me to achieve the level that I've achieved in Montgomery County. But the one that I think I place at the top of all that would be Roscoe Nix.
Yeah, I loved Roscoe. He was not an incrementalist.
Yeah.
He didn't want to hear that things take time, and I've always agreed with that because like take time. I mean, the Civil War was like we were 150 years past the Civil War. How much time does it take to accept people basically is the same as you are, with the same rights you have? And I tell the story of there was an interview I saw in the movie I'm Not Your Negro, about James Baldwin.
Right.
And he's in the halls of Congress, and some reporter pushes a mic in his face and say, people here say you're going too fast. You know, what do you say to that? And he says, they want us to wait another 40 years. And I was in the movie theater and I thought, 40 years, let's see, 65 plus 40, 2005. Actually, no. And that, to me, is one of the most distressing things, is the pervasiveness of racism and the damage it continues to do, and the inability of this country to come to terms with it, to have any kind of reconciliation commission. It's like some people still think they lost the war and it was a terrible thing.
Yeah. Well, you were talking to Roscoe Nix. Roscoe Nix is really the person who urged me to run for public office. I was very reluctant to do so. I formed an organization called SURGE, which was designed to elicit people in the community to sort of break the color barrier, because by the time I decided ultimately to run, not only we had not elected an African American, a black person to the county council, we had not elected any person of color to any county political position, Asian, African American, Latino, any, the legislative body to any of the elective offices. After forming the organization, I was trying to recruit other people to run. And everyone looked at the numbers, because African Americans, for example, made up about 6 or 7% of the county, Asians about 2%, Latinos about maybe 3 or 4%, and those numbers were intimidating. I couldn't get anyone to run for that office. And Roscoe finally looked at me and said, well, you should do it. And I said, no, I don't want to do it. He said, no, you should do this. He said, you've gone out here, you've talked the talk, you need to walk the walk. How can you look at yourself in the mirror tomorrow and say that you're not going to do this when you're making all of these statements all over the county about the need for doing this? You're not the person that you ought to be unless you step forth yourself and run. And given Roscoe's admonition, ultimately I decided to run. But I had no intent to do so when I first started the process.
You ran for county executive the first time, and I remember you, like the executive county council. I remember you describing your initial ads in that campaign, and I think it's germane to kind of Black History Month and how you felt you had to be presented in order to have a chance to be heard?
Well, it's sort of unusual. I had a really strong background resume, but the question we had in the back of our mind was whether or not people would give us an opportunity. And we wanted people to look at it, to read it, to understand it. But they had to read it. And so for 6 months or so, there was no photograph of me on any campaign literature. It was basically Ike Leggett, and you had to read through it, and if you read through it long enough, you would figure that I was an African American. But we've achieved the purpose if you've gone through it and read through it, because you've seen, oh, this guy is this, he's that, he's wonderful on these issues. So we did that. And we went through that for a long period of time, and essentially we ended up winning. Now, we may have been a little bit overly sensitive to that, but I remember something that happened between the primary and the general election. After we won the primary, my photograph is now on the literature. We're at Western Avenue at the metro station. I'm passing out literature. I'm feeling very good the fact that we won the primary. And there was a gentleman who walked out of one of the high-rise buildings in Friendship Heights. He's coming toward me, and I'm standing there at the metro station at Western Avenue. I give him the piece of paper, literature with my photograph on it. He looks at it, looks at me again, looks at it. He said, "Oh, young man, I'm sorry, I don't vote in the District of Columbia." The assumption was that I was on the wrong side of Western Avenue, that I was confused, that I should have been on the other side. I didn't say anything. I think I had a sort of strange look at my face. And the guy left, and I said, boy, that was pretty weird. 2 weeks later, the gentleman who I saw at the Metro called me. He said, "I want to apologize." He said, "I don't know why I said that. That was inappropriate. I just made an assumption, and I'm stereotyping you as a member of the District of Columbia, not in Montgomery County." He said, "I looked at your background, I read an awful lot about you. I want to help you." He ended up, Mark, working in my campaign all the way through for every office that I ran up until the last one that he died right before that. It touches me every time I think about that, because it was an encounter that confronted all of the stereotypes, the racism that you would see occasionally. But in that instant, he changed, and I had a better reflection of the people that I ultimately would represent. That was a heartbreaking moment for me. But it turned out to be good.
I think you set the right tone and the kind of leadership that made a difference here. I just wanted to let you know I really appreciate it, and thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for serving this very challenging job in Montgomery County. I know the challenges that you face, and you've done a wonderful job in leading our great county.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.